All right, Sean, today's video, let's talk about a really important topic, and we kind of alluded to it in one of our previous videos on how to rotate the chest in a golf swing. Now we're going to talk about how to rotate the hips in the golf swing. It seems simple, right? But every day we see golfers that have difficulty doing this.
Well, and it's a little more in-depth detail than what most people think. When someone thinks turn the hips, they just think turn.
Right.
And I think that's where the problem lies. There's not enough detail in the instruction to move the hips the way they're really supposed to.
And there's a definite sequencing of when we want to move those hips relative to one another. And really it comes down to adding more distance and more speed and more consistency to the golf swing when you do it correctly.
Absolutely.
All right, Sean, let's first go over three of really the most common issues with hip rotation that we see every single day.
Okay.
And I'll represent the wall here.
Okay.
So let's put you down the line.
Okay. So I think the first problem is, let's talk about kind of the spacing here. So let's just say at a dress I have about a hand width from the wall, right? This problem I'm seeing a lot more, especially with our eye lessons that are coming in. I'm seeing this problem 90% of the eye lessons that come in. So as the golfer turns back, the problem they're having is they're taking their rear end inward on the backswing as they turn.
So it's literally an early extension
on the backswing
of the hips in the backswing.
Yeah, so
see it all the time.
They're turning, and they just don't have the idea that they need to be feeling like they get some angle to their hips. Maybe they turn them level and they turn them underneath. It levels the shoulders out too much. It may be the number one backswing hip issue that I see is this turning the hips underneath, going back. So that's number one.
What do you see for a cause of that?
So a couple different things. I think one of them might be the golfer tries to turn the left hip out towards the golf ball instead of taking the right hip back and behind and getting it deep.
Right. We'll also see golfers who aware of their early extension, so they'll really try to start with the butt back. It's so far out of balance and out of position that the first move back is kind of finding the balance, finding a better position to rotate.
Great point. So to get out of that, what Mike said, just make sure when you set up, you're not having to sit down squat.
Right.
Just bend forward and feel like your back of your rear end doesn't get too far behind your heels.
Goes back to that looking over the fence.
Yeah, and that'll give you a chance not to come in on the backswing. So the setup part will help, and also what I was alluding to before, and Mike, you might want to help me with this because I hear you talking about this a lot. And we did a YouTube video on this, right? The gears, pros versus AMs. A lot of the amateurs move this left hip out toward the ball instead of moving the right one back and around.
Right. So if you're looking at the golfer straight down, like a bird's eye view, we've got my fist here will represent the left hip socket and the right hip socket. We'll see a lot of amateurs will really swing this left hip around this right hip. So this left hip really goes out and around, the old idea of getting the left shoulder over the right foot. That's taken to a huge extreme. So this left hip has a lot of travel to do. Now on the downswing, again, we have about a quarter of a second. There's not nearly enough time for this left hip to get back and out of the way. So it gets stuck and the right hip moves out forward. And you wind up with a big move towards the golf ball and very little rotation just because of the timing and how much travel this hip did in the backswing and how much travel this one needs to do on the downswing.
Exactly, and to counter that a little bit, the feeling would be I'll have people get up against the wall and just feel like they take the right hip back and around,
right,
and let the left hip go where it's going to go, and that puts them in a totally different spot.
And that's not the same as doing this.
No.
Right? This hip can still go back and around while keeping the right angle to this knee. We don't really want to throw the hips and rotate around the ankles to accomplish that.
That's a good point too, and we're talking about rotation, but there's also like lateral movement involved, right? So let's say I have whatever spacing this is at a dress. As I go back, I don't want to increase that a drastic amount. There's a little bump towards it and then maybe a little move away from it, but for all intents and purposes, you don't want a whole lot of movement towards a target by the time you get to the top of your swing.
So going back to our really simple hip socket joint here, when you just did that, the left hip moved forward some, but the right hip did more of the work.
Yeah, it went back around
Yes.
this way. So what we want to feel, let's say I put the shaft here, turning back and around, I'll have basically the same angle that I started with if you're drawing lines
Right.
on video. You may see a little gapping, but you don't want to see too much of a gap this way, and you don't want to see any mass on the other side.
And the reason that's important is because of the third reason here. That left hip, we see probably, when you boil it down, probably the number one issue with golfers rotating their hips is that the left hip is a blocker,
Yeah.
right? And if you've ever played football or whatever, you know, the blocker controls where the ball goes. So here's the ball, there's the blocker. If this blocker isn't getting out of the way in time, this ball has nowhere to go, and you're going to be early extended, raise the handle, and have a lot of consistency issues down at impact.
Yeah, so that's the third issue is the
Right.
hip launch, right? We
Yeah.
call it the launch. So the golfer, let's say they get up to the top in a good spot.
Mm-hmm.
They've got their right hip into the wall, their left hip's off the wall. Their first move is to launch the right hip off the wall straight
Right.
towards the ball or the target line. And that's not the right way to do it. The guy that does that usually comes down this way and gets really steep. The way to do that is to reconnect here with both hips, right?
Right, that left hip actually, let's go to setup.
Okay.
This left hip, wherever it's sitting right now, actually has to get deeper than where it started from.
Yeah, so right hip connects,
Yep.
and then both sides of my rear end connect, almost like I'm making a fingerprint
Yep.
down this wall, right?
Yep.
Which allows them to get deep enough to get back out of the way. And I'd almost push this over if I did it correctly.
That's exactly right, yeah.
It's
There's
just
a lot
a
of players.
learned motion.
That's exactly right. So we've got to really be careful of how much travel we give this left hip to do, right? It's not going to want to do a lot. And then we also got to make sure it gets back and out of the way. So when this right hip goes through, everybody's right hip's going to swing. It needs to be replacing where the left hip went rather than kind of finding its own path out towards the golf ball.
Absolutely.
So keep that in mind as we come back with a few drills here that are really going to help you train how to properly move your hips in the golf swing. All right, Sean, let's pull our wall back out and go into this kind of early extension in the backswing problem that we see so many golfers deal with.
Okay, so first thing is make sure you don't get your rear end too far behind your heels. So
Right.
almost feeling like you don't have a rear end if you do it right.
I actually like when we do this drill, I actually like golfers to feel like they're kind of crowding the golf ball a little bit. Like they're just closer to it than where they normally start so they can create some space.
Yeah, so basically I'm here. I bent forward like I'm bending over a fence, and my back of my rear end is just a couple inches behind my heels, right? The kiss of death would be this move where it starts pushing into this wall and I get 4, 5, 6
Right,
inches
right.
back, right? And then when you do that, that makes you come in. So the first step to this drill is just get set up the right way. Bend over the fence, give yourself about an inch here. And when you check yourself, make sure if you drop the line down, you're just a couple inches back. The first thing you're going to do here on this drill, though, is once you get your inch space, I want you to turn, point the left shoulder down, which is going to give you some depth to this hip. You're going to feel this hip go back around. It's going to go into the wall and actually slide down the wall this way a little bit,
Right.
down the wall behind me, instead of taking the left hip out toward the ball
Right.
and turning level. So it looks like it's subtle, but it's such a huge deal because when you get in this position at the top in a good spot, it's so much easier to transition. If you get in a poor spot here, a lot of times the club gets out of position and you can't move the lower body correctly into the downswing.
That's exactly right. And this really kind of goes into another aspect of the hip rotation is when you're getting this hip deeper, right? So many golfers think there's a backswing with any body segment really. There's a backswing with the hips, then there's a transition, then there's a downswing. You want to blend those. So as you're getting this hip deeper, it's starting, because again, the club's moving, it's starting its
Recentering.
forward recentering move almost in a one fluid motion.
Absolutely.
Right? So you don't necessarily want to think here, take it up to the top, move over. You want to make this one fluid motion so you can kind of really take advantage of what this left hip needs to do.
Okay, so that got us through the backswing basically, into the transition.
Right.
So I think the next move here is to figure out how not to get this right hip to launch,
Yes.
right? So the drill for that is same setup position, one hand width, right side of your rear end into the wall, and then I want to make this reconnecting with my left side of my rear end, right?
Right.
So it's right, both, left, that way. It's right side, both sides of my rear end, left side. almost like I'm making a fingerprint. If you're at the police station, if you've ever been arrested, I haven't. But if you
Sure you have.
make a fingerprint, both, and then the left, like that. And then add the right arm feeling to it. And then if you have something like this, you could actually just make some easy swings. And Mike has a pretty good drill,
So
right?
this will be kind of the next stage of that. And we've got our exercise ball here, and this is really good. So the drill you just did with the wall is something everybody can do, and it's really, you do it without the club or put the club across your shoulders. Now, if you've got a wall at home or out in the garage or somewhere at the course or whatever, and you want to start making swings with the club, and you can actually hit balls if you've got a place for it. I'll be the wall here, and we're going to have Sean do the same thing. So I like to see golfers start off of the ball or just slightly holding the ball against the wall. So he's using a little bit of pressure to hold this ball against the wall. Now, as he comes back, he's really going to squeeze it with his right cheek. Now, as he comes down, he's going to switch it over and hold the ball against the ball against the wall. It's like a bad Dr. Seuss rhyme.
And then when I do
the ball
that,
against the wall with his left.
and when I do that, I'm pointing my chest back toward the ground.
Yes.
Don't just think you have to stick your butt back. The part of this is the forward bend of the upper body,
right.
which puts some pressure there. And then from there, I'm going to go to my left heel and kind of right forefoot. And when I do that, I'll get deeper on this left side. So instead of going up, a lot of you right here will launch the hip and the ball's going to fall.
That's right. Now,
So it's a good feeling to get into to have
it's
that
a
on
great
the wall.
feeling when you're responsible for holding this ball up. Right,
Yeah.
so let's do that again. I'm not going to hold this ball. You're just going to, you be totally responsible for your hip holding this
So
ball.
just barely holding it.
Yep.
Now I'm putting more pressure.
Yep.
More pressure, right?
Yep.
Chest lowers into the ball. Now, when you do that, if you've got a club in your hand, your tendency, if you've never done this before, is to do this, because this forward bend is a little bit of a steepening move that
That's
good
right.
players have, but good players have figured out how to rotate the forearms a little bit to get the club back on the elbow plane, basically,
That's
right?
exactly
on the
right.
swing plane. So if you do this a couple times, now you say, okay, I got to match that up with a shallowing move, right? Because
Yep.
these things need to
Yep.
fit together. You can do it in the mirror if you have a mirror at home. Get it to come down on plane. Now I'm in a perfect delivery spot. I've got connection with both sides of my rear end, right?
Yep.
My chest is pointed at the ground. My shaft is lined up with my hands. And now I can just turn on the rotation. Bam, hit the ball with compression, solid. And when I do that, I'm going to control the face really well.
That's exactly right. This is an excellent drill. We do this a lot. But there's one little bonus. You mentioned something really key is the pitch of the club. So let's have you get back up here and hold this to the ground. Now, again, you're going to be doing this. I'm going to be playing the role of a wall,
Okay.
which sounds
Great
fitting
wall.
relative to
Yeah.
mental acuity here.
Yeah.
So, all right. So he's going to bring the club back in the backswing, and this is why we like using these Swiss balls, because there's enough room to really get the club back. I like to see a lot of you guys who are used to coming down steep and have a hard time shallowing to go ahead and put the club on the wall.
So pretend this whole thing is a wall.
Right, this whole thing is a wall. You're just going to lay the club on the wall.
Yep.
Now, as he does his hips correctly, you're going to keep the club on that wall. So you're going to have a overly exaggerated shallowing move while keeping the hips back. And that's really why golfers extend in the first place. It's an effort to shallow the club.
So the golf swing, we need to do a whole video on this. It's a combination of steeps and shallows.
Right.
And they all have to fit.
That's right.
So those of you that have been launching the hip, let's say the club is on a good plane, but you've been doing it, hold that ball for me.
Yep.
You do it by launching the hip. Okay, the club is on plane, but the only reason it is because you've come off the wall.
Right.
Now, if Mike and I teach you to stay on the wall, you're going to do this the first time because you don't have a shallow enough arm
That's exactly
and
right.
club motion. So now when you learn to go down the wall and make your pelvis move correctly here against the Swiss ball, now you have a shallow enough arm movement with a steepening body movement in the start of the downswing, and that's what
exactly
good
right.
players do.
This is a really valuable, we'll call these mouse traps, because Sean is, when you're doing this with the club, I want Sean's focus to be on what the club's doing, making sure that's working right. The ball is going to let him know if he's doing his hips right.
Yes.
So he's not trying to think clubs, hips, ball, all that stuff at one time. He's thinking club movement's right. The body is going to have to start doing its own work and making sure the ball stays up. You get immediate feedback if you don't, because the ball's going to hit the ground.
Yeah, and one more little bonus here. As you're coming down the wall, make sure the edge of the club is against the wall. Don't slide the toe down the wall.
toe down the wall.
And yeah, if you flush that back of the club against the wall, it's going to be square, and that's good because you're going to need it to be square or slightly toward the ground when you start pouring on more rotation in here. So This drill is like Mike's, like a catch-all.
Yeah.
It gives you the body motion, and then it's giving you the shallow enough arm motion to steepen the body a little bit, like great players do right here, and then they can pour on the rotation. So
Exactly right.
don't discount these drills. You know, you need to do them a lot at home. In the mirror, maybe have a full-length mirror this way, so you can see the club motion as you're sliding down the wall. I mean, what a great little practice station.
Yeah, in fact, one of our most loyal watchers, since assign lessons all the time, he does this on a mirror. Makes me nervous as all get out. When he lays his club on the mirror and comes down, makes me really nervous, but he's absolutely seeing what he does. So you're gonna get the feedback. This is really the kind of the culmination of all this. You're gonna get the feedback of what the club's doing, shallowing correctly, really an exaggerated version of the club shallowing. The hip's gonna have to do their thing, and the upper body. So it's tying everything together with this one drill. So do this drill. Let us know how it goes in the comments below. We'd love to hear back from you. And we'll see you guys on the next one.
If you want more compression on your iron shots, more tour quality, solid iron shots every time you go out to play, we created a free video just for you. In the pinned comment below, you're gonna find a link. Click on the link, you're gonna be taken to another page. You're gonna enter your name and your email address. Once you do that, you're gonna be taken instantly to the free video training where you're gonna learn our #1 go-to drill to get more compression on your iron shots, which is gonna allow you to hit more greens and have more fun playing the game. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and give us a like, give us a thumbs up. Also, if you have a question about the video or there's a topic you want us to cover in a future video, leave it down in the comments below. We read every single comment and we respond to them, and that's how we create new content for you in the future. Now, if you haven't already, go ahead and click the subscribe button so you know exactly when one of our new videos comes out.